Welcome to the deep dive. Nobody's like really getting to a topic. And today we're going to be talking about debt um, and how we can really achieve financial freedom. So we've got a ton of research here.
Mm.
Like we always do articles, papers, real life stories. It's going to be great. Now, debt, I know it can feel like a kind of uncomfortable thing to
Yeah.
talk about, but
Yeah.
it's something that affects so many people from all different backgrounds and income levels. It's really something that we can tackle, though.
Yeah.
So today we're going to go beyond just the surface level stuff. We're going to look at the different types of debt, the ways it can affect us mentally and emotionally, and most importantly, we're going to give you strategies to manage it all.
It's funny how debt is often made out to be this like scary monster,
Right.
but really it's just a tool like anything else. And just like any tool, it can be used in good ways and bad ways.
So how do we make sure we're using debt the right way?
Well, the first thing is we have to really understand what we're dealing with, right? So let's talk about the types of debt, like what makes them different. So for example, there's secured debt, which is when you have something backing up the loan. Like if you've got a mortgage or an auto loan, the house or the car is the collateral. And then there's unsecured debt. That's more like credit cards or personal loans where there's no asset tied to it.
Okay, so I guess that means secured debt is less risky for the lender
Yeah,
because if you don't pay, they could just take the house or the car, right?
exactly. And because of that, usually the interest rates on those loans are lower than unsecured debt. And then on top of those, you've got revolving debt, things like credit cards, where you have a limit you can borrow up to and you can pay it down and borrow again. And then installment debt, where you borrow a certain amount and you make payments over a set period of time, like student loans or car loans.
Gotcha. So like different flavors of debt.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the mental and emotional side of things earlier. Like what does that really mean?
Well, it's real. Debt can really weigh on people. I mean, it causes stress, anxiety, and it can even lead to depression for some folks. It can affect relationships. It can make it hard to do things you want to do. It can feel like you're just trapped.
Yeah, that's not something we talk about enough. So how do we get out of that feeling of being overwhelmed by it all?
One of the best things you can do is really take control of your money. And that starts with knowing where it's going. Making a budget is key.
Right, like a roadmap for your money. You're deciding where it goes instead of just wondering where it went.
Perfect analogy. And honestly, it doesn't have to be a super strict or confusing thing. There are tons of ways to budget, so just find one that works for you in your life.
And, one of the big strategies we saw over and over in the research was that debt snowball method. Can you break that down for us?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. And it works really well for people who need to see those little wins early on. So basically, you list out all your debts from the smallest to the largest, and you forget about the interest rates for now. You put all your extra money towards paying off that smallest debt first, while just making the minimum payments on everything else.
So you get that boost of knocking out a debt quickly, and it keeps you going.
Exactly. And once that first one's gone, you take the money you were using for that and roll it into the next smallest debt. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and bigger.
I get it. That makes sense. But wouldn't it make more sense financially to pay off the debt with the highest interest first?
Yeah, so that's a different method called the debt avalanche, where you focus on the one that's costing you the most in interest, which saves you money overall.
So which one's better?
I don't think there's one right answer. It really depends on your personality and your situation. If you need that motivation of seeing progress fast, the snowball's great. But if you're more about the numbers and minimizing those interest charges, the avalanche might be better.
So it's about finding what works for you, what keeps you going. But let's back up a second. Before we even get to putting off debt, how do we avoid getting into more debt?
Oh, that's huge. And I think the biggest culprit for a lot of people is credit cards. They seem so harmless, but they can get out of hand fast with those high interest rates.
Yeah, we've all been there. Tempted by that buy now, pay later thinking. So how do we break that cycle?
Honestly, one thing that really works is using cash more. When you're actually handing over physical money, it makes you think more about what you're buying.
It's like a reality check.
Totally.
Yeah.
Another thing you can try is the 24-hour rule. If you want to buy something, especially if it's not something you need, wait a day before you do it. It can stop you from making those impulse buys you regret later.
It's like a cooling off period for your spending. So getting off the credit card train is important, but we got to build a good foundation too, right?
Yeah.
How does saving fit into all of this?
Saving is like the key. It's your safety net, your cushion when things go wrong.
Right, like when the car breaks down or you lose your job.
Yeah.
Having some savings makes a huge difference.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a ton of money. Just small amounts consistently add up over time. Aim to have at least 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up for emergencies.
That seems like a good goal. But wouldn't it make more sense to use that extra money to pay down debt faster?
That's a good question, and it's a balance. Paying down high-interest debt is important, but having even a small emergency fund can stop you from going further into debt if something unexpected happens.
So it's like a double win. You're tackling the debt and building that security at the same time.
Exactly.
This is great. We've covered so much already. But I feel like we're just getting started. Before we go to the next part of our deep dive, can you give us a quick recap of what we've talked about?
Sure. So we went through the different kinds of debt, why it's important to understand them. We talked about how debt can affect us emotionally, and we discussed budgeting, the debt snowball, and avalanche methods, and how to get away from relying on credit cards. Oh, and of course, the importance of building up your savings.
That was awesome. And for everyone listening, think about this. What's one little thing you can do today to start getting control of your finances? We'll be back in a bit with even more strategies and tips to help you get out of debt and achieve real, lasting financial freedom. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we've laid the groundwork. We know what debt is, why it matters, and how to start taking charge. Now let's get into some real tactics for tackling debt head on.
I love it. Let's get practical. One thing we haven't mentioned yet is debt consolidation.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. For those who aren't familiar, what is debt consolidation exactly?
It's basically taking all those different debts you might have, like credit cards, personal loans, whatever, and combining them into one single loan, ideally with a lower interest rate. So it simplifies things, you're only making one payment, and you could save money on interest.
Streamlining, I like it. Makes it easier to manage. But are there any downsides to watch out for?
Well, sometimes the new loan might end up having a longer repayment term, so even though the interest rate might be lower, you could end up paying more in the long run. You really got to look at the terms carefully and make sure it's actually going to benefit you.
So it's not a magic solution, but it can be a good tool in the right situation. Now, what about those situations where things have gotten really bad, like people are struggling to even make the minimum payments? What can they do?
Yeah, that's tough. It's important to remember you're not alone in that. There are options and resources out there. One thing to look into is debt settlement. That's where you negotiate with your creditors to pay a smaller amount than what you originally owed.
So you're basically making a deal.
Exactly. It can be a good option if you're in a really difficult spot financially. But there are some things to be aware of. It can hurt your credit score, and sometimes the amount of debt that's forgiven is considered taxable income.
So it's something to consider carefully, maybe with the help of a financial advisor. We've talked a lot about the numbers and strategies, but let's talk about the emotional side of debt, because it's not just about the math, right?
Absolutely. Debt brings up a lot of feelings: shame, guilt, anxiety, even anger. It can be motivating, but it can also be paralyzing.
Yeah, it's like it clouds your thinking, makes it hard to see clearly. What are some ways to deal with that emotional side of things?
The first thing is to acknowledge those feelings. Don't judge yourself for feeling them. It's okay to feel overwhelmed or ashamed. Talking to someone you trust can really help. A friend, family member, therapist, whoever you feel comfortable with.
Getting it out in the open, breaking the silence.
Exactly. And remember, asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It takes strength to face this stuff.
Reaching out for support is a good thing, whether it's about the finances or the emotions. But there are also things we can do ourselves to change how we think about debt.
Definitely. One thing that can be powerful is reframing. Instead of seeing debt as this burden you're carrying, try to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
I like that. What does that look like in practice?
Every time you make a payment, no matter how small, recognize it as a step forward. Celebrate those wins. And don't dwell on the past mistakes that might have led to the debt. Focus on the positive changes you're making now to build a better future.
Shifting from that feeling of scarcity to a feeling of abundance and control.
Exactly.
But what about those moments when you're tempted to overspend? How do you resist that urge?
That's where that solid financial foundation comes in. Having clear goals, a budget you stick to, an emergency fund, all of that helps you stay on track when those temptations come up.
It's like having that safety net, knowing you have a plan. We talked before about seeking professional advice. When is it especially important to talk to an expert?
There are a few situations where it can be really helpful. If you're feeling totally overwhelmed, struggling to create a budget, thinking about debt consolidation or settlement, or if you just want to create a solid financial plan for the future, a financial advisor can give you personalized advice for your specific situation.
So it's like having a coach in your corner, helping you navigate it all. But how do you even find a good financial advisor?
Look for someone who's certified, experienced. Ask friends or family for recommendations, and schedule a consultation to see how they communicate, make sure it's a good fit.
Like any other relationship, trust and communication are key. Now let's talk about negotiating with creditors. That can be really intimidating for people.
It can be, but it's often worth it, especially if you're having trouble making ends meet. The key is to be prepared, be polite, and don't give up.
So be your own advocate, explore all the options. What are some tips for making those negotiations successful?
First, get organized. Gather all your documents, account statements, income and expense records, anything that supports your situation.
Having all your ducks in a row.
Right. Then when you contact your creditors, explain everything clearly and calmly. Be ready to suggest a new payment plan that works for both of you.
And creditors are usually more willing to work with you if you're proactive and communicate openly.
For sure. It's a two-way street. They want to get paid, you want to pay them back. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone.
This has been fantastic. We've covered so much, from debt consolidation and settlement to the emotional side of debt, and how to negotiate with creditors.
We've talked about when to get professional help, and hopefully giving you the knowledge to take control and create a path to financial freedom.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that there's hope. Debt might feel heavy now, but with the right tools and mindset, we can get out of it and build a better financial future.
Couldn't agree more. It's about taking control, making good choices, and celebrating every step you take.
Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, take a moment to think about what's resonated with you. What's one action you can take today to get closer to your financial goals?
Hold on to that thought. We'll be back in a bit to wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts on achieving lasting financial freedom.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've gotten real about debt, but now let's talk about the goal. Achieving financial freedom.
I love this part. You know, we're not just managing debt, we're building a future where money works for you, not against you.
Exactly, creating the life we want. So how do we build that financially free life?
It's like building a house. You need a strong foundation. And for us, that foundation has 3 pillars: spending mindfully, saving consistently, and investing smartly.
Okay, let's break those down. What's mindful spending?
It's about being intentional with every dollar. It's not about not buying anything. It's about making sure your spending aligns with your values. You know, ask yourself, does this purchase help me reach my goals, or does it take me further away?
Making choices that reflect what matters, not just following trends.
Exactly. And that leads us to the second pillar: saving consistently, building that safety net, creating security and possibilities.
We talked about the emergency fund, but what about saving for bigger things, like retirement, a house?
Great examples. The key is making saving a habit, not a chore. Automate it, even if it's a small amount each month. You'll be surprised how quickly it grows.
It's like the saying, pay yourself first.
Exactly. Treat your savings like a bill you have to pay, just like rent or utilities.
Makes sense. So mindful spending frees up more money to save, which then lets us invest.
Yes, and that's our third pillar: smart investing. Putting your money to work, letting it grow and compound over time.
Investing can be intimidating, though. How do you even start?
Don't let fear stop you. There's so much information out there. Websites, books, financial advisors. Start small, learn as you go, and invest in things that match your risk tolerance and how long you want to invest for.
So I don't need to be an expert right away.
Not at all. It's a step-by-step process. And remember, investing is for the long haul. Don't sweat the small ups and downs. Focus on those long-term goals.
This has been so encouraging. We went from feeling overwhelmed by debt to knowing how to not only get out of it, but build a financially secure future.
It's been great. Listeners, remember, financial freedom is possible. It starts with your mindset, committing to learning, and consistently working towards your goals.
So as we wrap up the deep dive, one last question. What's one small change you can make today to start building your path to financial freedom? Remember, you've got the knowledge now. Take control of your future. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.